Hi, this is the beginning of Module 4. First part of Module 4, this is just vocabulary, so there are no problems to actually go to the board and do. I just want to review a few words with you. The first word is an exponent. Now we all should know what an exponent is and what his job is. The exponent is the small number that's located like to the top right of either a variable or a constant or an expression. And I've given you some examples inside the definition, like x to the second power, 5 to the third power, and then I have a monomial, 2x in parentheses raised to the fourth power. And all of the little numbers in red, those are called our exponents. Now what do those tell us to do? Those exponents tell us how many times we're going to multiply whatever the base is, whether it be a variable or a numerical value. We're going to multiply it to itself however many times that exponent says. So for instance, 5 to the third power means 5 times 5 times 5, which is equal to 125. So you multiplied 5 to itself 3 times. If it says x to the second, that means x times x. And when it says 2x to the fourth, that means 2x times 2x times 2x times 2x, 4 whole times. Our next word that we want to talk about is absolute value. What is absolute value? Well, absolute value is the distance a number is from 0 on the number line. So because it represents distance, we cannot have a negative absolute value. I've given you a couple of examples, and the only way in the last example that the answer is negative is when the negative is on the outside of the absolute value bars, because absolute value bars are treated as grouping symbols just like parentheses. So when you have a negative sign on the outside, it means, hey, I'm that spirit -1 and distribute me to whatever the answer is that you get from the inside. So the other examples, because the negative, like example, absolute value of -5, because the negative is on the inside, all it wants to do is ask you, what is the location of -5 on the number line? How far away from the 0 is it? It's 5 units from 0. Even though it's to the left, that part doesn't matter. So the absolute value of -5 is still +5, because that represents number of units from 0. The same thing goes with the example 3. Absolute value of 3 is just that, 3 units from 0 on the number line. The third vocabulary word is a radical. What is a radical? A radical sign, sometimes they call them square root signs. It just depends on who you're talking to. What do those square root signs, what do they really mean? It wants to know when you have a number under the square root sign, for example, the square root of 25, it wants to say, hey, what number times itself gives me that 25? Well, it's 5, because 5 times 5 is 25. So anytime you have the radical sign, the little square root sign that looks like a little check with a tail, that means what number times itself gives me that value, that radical number that's underneath there. Sometimes you're going to see, like the example that I put on there where it has the little 3 and then the little root sign. That means the cube root. That means what number multiplied to itself 3 times gives me that 8, and that answers 2. So the root isn't always going to be 2 like a square root. Sometimes it can be a cube root to the third, or a 4th root, or a 5th root. That number doesn't matter. The procedure is what number multiplied to itself that many times gives you the value that's under there. Okay, next is the order of operations. Order of operations, I know you've heard this before. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And another thing they use it for is PEMDAS. That's just a shortcut to say, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And remember what that means. The P stands for parentheses, but we all should know that Parentheses are not the only grouping symbol in math. You could also have a square root sign. You could also have absolute value bars. It just means whatever it is that's grouping those numbers together, do what's inside them first. And then once you're done with that, then you do the rest of the problem. So the rest of the order of operations would be, after parentheses are your grouping symbols, you're going to want to do exponents. Exponents get evaluated next. Then you have multiplication and division. Now, it's not always do the multiplication first. It always depends on which one comes first from left to right, multiplication or division. Either one from left to right. Same thing goes with addition. Addition and subtraction are the very last things that you do in order of operations, but you also do those in order from left to right. Okay? Now, the last word that we're going to talk about is evaluating. What does the word evaluate mean? Most of the time, evaluate means to solve, to work it out, and that's what we're going to do in the rest of Module 4, is we're going to evaluate some algebraic expressions using different formats like distributive properties, substitution, other things. And we're going to use the order of operations to help us do that evaluating. So come back with the next module and I'll show you how to do those.